What's the fastest process to edit your story? In order to edit your story in the fastest way possible, you want to focus on two main aspects: rhythm and specificity. When you finish your book, you want to take a break from it. This you may have heard already. Now, what about the time frame? 2 to 3 months seems to be an appropriate time frame. Why is that, and in which conditions? We remark that if you are writing around 6 books a year, or between 4 and 8 books a year, you would need a break from your book, which would be of 2 to 3 months, which correlates approximately with the fact that you're writing 6 books a year. Otherwise, taking such a long time in order to revise your book may not be useful at all. And another advice we would give you is to give the book to someone else immediately, for them to revise them in your place, and then get them to return to you with their feedback. Now, you may want to take a break from your story for 2 to 3 months if you're writing a series. So if you're writing less than 6 books a year, let's say you're writing a trilogy, you may want to take at least that amount of time between each book if you're writing a series. But if you're writing 6, 4, 3 standalone books, you may not need that amount of time. And we rather advise that you give your books to someone else in your team to benefit from their feedback. The main advantage of taking a break from your story for 2 to 3 months, or to writing multiple standalone books, which would allow you to take a break for less than 2 to 3 months, is to be surprised by your own writing when you return to it. And that's the first key aspect when it comes to rhythm. You want to be able, as a writer, but also as a reader, now you're taking part of your public, to be able to establish a synergy between what's familiar in your story and what's surprising. You want to be able to establish what's familiar, what's comfortable in your story, and what's surprising, what's shocking, in order to manage the rhythm in your story while you're reading it, you're rereading it, or you're reading it for a third time. It is a matter of layers. Once you finish writing your book, you're at the first layer of analysis. Once you reread it, you're at the second layer, and then once you read it for the third time, you're at the third layer of analysis. But more on that in the following question sections. You want to give yourself 1 month. Now, if you're writing a 300 pages book, or approximately 300 pages, you want to revise 10 pages a day. If you've written a 600 pages book, 20 pages a day, and so on, that's just a matter of simple proportionality. But you don't want to take more than 1 month in order to edit your book. Otherwise, you may start to make mistakes. And by making mistakes, we really mean start being confused by your own story. Now, what can we do about this confusion? In order to limit the confusion on your perspective on your own story, you want to design your cover as soon as possible, if possible before you start the story. But designing a cover after finishing the story gives you more insight on your own writing. So you may want to design a cover before writing the book, and then redesign the cover after you've written the book, and then compare the two covers to give you a lot of insight on your perception of your characters, your environments, and your storyline. Now, this cover would only be the image, the graphical retranscription of your story's 4 main themes. And then, once you have your 4 main themes, you can synthesize them into one core theme, which then will become your cover. Also, think about the synergy between this core theme and your story's title. If you want to edit your story in the fastest way possible, you want to be fully focused on your ending. Being able to be completely focused on your ending, and in most cases, writing your last chapter first, or if you can't write your last chapter, at least write your last scene first, will give you the greatest amount of clarity when it comes to writing the book afterwards. So what do you focus on in the ending? Stakes and resolution. Focus on the synergy between stakes and resolution. What's the issue? What are the choices of the characters? And which choices do they take? Do they take as the most opportune choices in this situation? Then once you've written your ending, you want to focus on the synergy between the ending and the introduction, the ending and the crisis, and the ending and the evolution of the relationships between your characters. Now, the synergy between the ending and the introduction is the most important, because you want to write a cyclical story. Now, not all story will benefit from the cycle structure as much. But if you're writing a tale, if you're writing a fable, if you're writing an allegory or a parable, you want to be able to create a tightly cyclical story. Because the amount of resonance in all cases between your ending and your introduction will make your ending more attaching. It will develop the attachment between your public and your story. Because as the public now recognize the story as a familiar space, they will want to find elements they've seen through the whole story in the ending. So building a cyclical story maximize the attachment between the story and the public. Once you've established the synergy between the ending and the introduction, you want to establish the relationship between the ending and the crisis. How did the ending emerges from the crisis? So whereas the crisis in chapter 3, or your first crisis, your climax in chapter 6, and your last crisis in chapter 9, all of them should, by some aspect, wherever the introduction of a new character, the introduction of a new item, the introduction of a new environment, should all resonate in your ending. You can even write your 10th chapter in this manner. Now, let's suppose you have your 10th chapter and it's 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph will show the resonance with the introduction or with the first crisis, depending on what you want to do. The second paragraph will show the relationship between the ending and the climax, and the third paragraph will display the relationship between the ending and the last crisis. So you have your 4 paragraphs and you have 4 chapters of correspondence. So introduction, chapter 3, chapter 6, and chapter 9. And so you have your 4 paragraphs already written, really, because you only want now to display the resonance between these 4 chapters and the ending. Finally, you want to display the evolution of the relationship through the ending, through the whole story, really, and through the whole chapters we've mentioned. So chapter 1, chapter 3, chapter 6, and chapter 9. But you want to emphasize the outcome of these relationships. So how do you do that? You create a synergy, or you display the synergy between the level of satisfaction of each character on their relationships and the loss they had to experience through the story. Now, if you can balance loss and satisfaction, you'll create happy characters that are satisfied by their outcome, whatever this outcome is. The fastest way to edit your story is to manage rhythm and specificity and create a balance between these two notions. In order to create a balance in terms of rhythm in your story, you want to balance familiarity and surprise, and when it comes to specificity, you want to balance all the elements of each scene in order to create a synergy between them. So, what are they? The emotion you're targeting, the setting in which the scene takes place, the characters, and the stakes. Now, when it comes to emotion, we'll limit ourselves to 4 main emotions here, which will correspond to our 4 main genres. So anger for action, excitement for adventure, sadness for drama, and fear for horror. So wherever the genre you're choosing to write, you want to exacerbate this emotion. If you're writing action, you want to exacerbate anger and to some extent excitement and fear. If you're writing drama, you want to exacerbate sadness and to some extent excitement and fear. So now you're defining the main emotions you want to suscitate in your public. Which tool will you use to suscitate them? The setting. The setting is 3 elements: the atmosphere, the people, and the object. So in each of these elements, you want to display the main emotion, your target emotion. If it is excitement, for example, you want to exude excitement through your atmosphere. So through your people, it would be through the dialogues, and it would be through the dress code. Because excited people, let's suppose your people are all supposed to be excited to some extent. Now you want to create diversity, so excitement is the main emotion you transcribe through your people, but you want some of them to be angry, some of them to be disgusted, you want some of them to be fearful, you want some of them to be hopeful. So you want to create this diversity, but excitement is the main emotion should be transcribed here. So through the dress code, you show what your people are doing, why they're here, and what are their expectations. So same thing for the atmosphere. You choose certain colors, you pick certain colors which represent excitement, and you place these colors, you paint your scene with these colors. Same thing finally with the objects. Now, when it comes to excitement, the object will become the target of the stakeholders, of the characters. So the object is the cause, or the objects, plural, are the cause of excitement here. So choose an object which may be the main goal of your whole story and depict it as the source of excitement, if excitement is your main emotion. Now for the characters, and you want to treat characters and stakes almost simultaneously, because the characters are the stakeholders. All your characters, your 4 main characters, are gathered into your scene. They're gathered into your setting because there's an object of interest in this scene, in this setting. Now, if you want to display what this object is, you have to think about the issue, and the issue in most cases will be acquiring the object, possessing the object, reaching the object. Now, object does not mean material object. It can be an immaterial object. It can be, it's not a material thing necessary. So the main issue in each situation, whatever the story you're writing, would be to acquire the object, because your character wants it and they have a difficulty to reach it. So you want to establish as soon as you can the synergy between the issue, getting the object, and the choices. How do they get the object? So issue or goal, you can confound them here, and choices, so processes. To summarize, each of your scenes will follow this pattern. First, you define your target emotion. Then you display this target emotion through the setting, through the atmosphere mainly, but also the people. Then you present your main characters, your protagonists, or your protagonists and your antagonists. And finally, you indicate the stake for each of these main stakeholders and what would be the possibility for them to acquire the object they're converting. The fastest way to edit a story is to be focused on your characters, on your environments, and on your storyline. Now, this focus would be both by your goals, the interests of the characters or stakeholders, and their reactions. Now, these 3 words depict a similar rhythm. What separates them mainly is time frame. Your goals, your characters' goals, are defined in the long run. Their interests are defined in the medium term and are more subject to change than the goals. And finally, the reactions are defined in the short term and are even more subject to change, to malleability. Reactions is the most flexible part, so you need to focus on them, but not as much as interests or goals. The goals of your character are the most rigid part of this schema. So now, while you're writing your dialogues and your descriptions, you want to focus on the goals more than anything else, and then on the interest, and finally on the reaction. So said in a different manner, while you're writing your phrases, while you're writing your sentences, you want to be specific to the character, to the environment, and to the storyline, which will allow you to write shorter sentences. Short sentences, or the shortest type of sentences as possible, is not your goal. It will become your process. Your goal is to be specific. And now, because you became more specific, you have the ability to write shorter sentences. Now, you have to consider that 7 words here is an average. Some sentences will take up to 15, 20 words, or certain monologues of your characters will be far more lengthier. But you want to have 7 words on an average. You may want also to fix yourself your own limits, because it's always a good idea to tell to yourself, okay, for this chapter, as this chapter is more action-oriented, your character will speak less, or as this chapter is more horror-oriented, your character will have less possibility to speak, because they have to remain silent, so they have to make their sentences as short as possible. So my limit for this chapter is 5 words or 3 words by sentence, because your characters have to communicate fast. So it's all about the scene. It's all about being specific to the scene. If your character are in a comfortable situation, they can talk more, they can talk a lot. If they are in a crisis situation, they won't be able to. So think about that when you establish your word limit when it comes to phrases in your chapter. You want to be able to establish the relationship between the goals, the interests, the reactions, and the amount and type of information that your characters have in each scene. Now you want to take advantage of that, and you want to consider that all your characters will have a different kind of information. So now, what does it mean? Your characters will have a certain amount of information that they need, and an amount of information that it's available to them. But now, there's not always a direct correlation between these two. The information needed by one character may be available to another character. Now, they have to meet each other, to agree to collaborate, and finally, to exchange the proper, specific piece of information that one needed and the other had. So think about that in each scene. That's the focus element, really. That's if you have to get anything from this episode, that's the most important part. In each scene, think about which kind of information is needed by each of your character and which kind of information is available to each of your character. So you can really draw a schema. You draw four dots, one for each of your character, and you put just upwards what's needed by this character. So for example, this character needs to find a mirror. She needs to find a specific mirror because that's a gift that she received for her birthday in the beginning of the story. And what's available to her? She knows that a fence has recently bought a mirror which looks like the one she was given. Now, when she gets to the fence, what does the fence need to know? The fence may have an interest in another object now. Another object like a dagger, maybe, for example, a specific dagger which belonged to a wealthy family from the last era of her country. So now your character needs to know that. But how does she know that? How does she get this information? So you want to be able to create a concordance directly between which information is needed by your character and which information is available to this character to establish relationships properly. Finally, you want to focus on the outcome of each scene. Because as for the whole story, If you write your ending first, you'll have more clarity. So it's always a matter of scale here. If you write your last chapter first, your story is clearer. If you write your last scene first, your whole chapter is clearer. And if you write your last sentence, your whole scene is clearer. So start with the end, whichever the scale, whether it's the scene, the chapter, or the whole story, and it will give you more clarity. The fastest way to write a story and then to edit your story is to be as specific as possible. Now, if you're rewatching this video, if you're rewatching this episode, you can jump straight to this last section because it's the most important section. Specificity is the crux of efficiency here. The more specific you are, the less thing you'll have to edit, because you're trying here to create a level of objective involvement. No. The very fact that you're using specific words for your characters, for your environment, for your context, will allow you to define what these three elements really are. Now, in the last section, we focus on the fact that all your characters will have a specific set of information. We have a specific type of information that they need. And there will also have a specific type of information that they have. So the balance between the needed information, the necessary information, and the available information is still key here as we get into the specificity part. So what do we mean by specificity here? You want to create a synergy between the phrases, the words, the sentences, and the situations. The more the words and phrases you use correspond to your situation, the tighter, the more cohesive your story and your world will be. Now, if we talk numbers, when it comes to characters, you want to give to each of your main characters and to some of your most important secondary characters 7 words or phrases. You want to give each of them 7 words or specific phrases. Now, what's the purpose of that? That's how you develop specificity. Now, when it comes to words and phrases here, does not necessarily mean that these words and phrases are used by your character. It's not about speech. It's not all about speech. It may be words that your character have been used by other characters to describe them. So, for example, the word shining. Maybe your character, the character never tell the word shining, but other characters, when they describe her, always use this word to describe her. So that's one specific word when it comes to defining your character's behavior, for example here. So you want to define 7 words or expressions that your character will always be characterized through, that are specific, that are unique to this character. So it's critical for main characters, and it could be a good idea for secondary characters as well. Now, you may not want to do it for tertiary characters, but you want to keep them as mundane as you can. But now, how do you depict it? You want to choose 1 word to define her interests, at least. For the interests, you can go for as many words as you want. You want 1 word or 1 phrase to define her goal, and the easiest way to do it is to let the character say what her goal is, and to say it multiple times in the story. That's the clearest way to do it. You want at least 1 word or phrase to describe her occupation, and your character can describe the occupation herself, or it could be another character. And again, it could be a word which defines her through her occupation, so it can be a nickname, for example. And you want at least, but it would also be a maximum, 4 words to characterize her behavior traits. So now, let's suppose her behavior traits are reckless, adventurous, relentless, and enthralled. So we have these 4 main words: reckless, adventurous, relentless, enthralled. So it's a character which is a combination between a rival and an enticer here. These 4 words, these 4 behavioral words may be, or sentences may be 4 quotes from the character, which will translate a behavior trait. They could be 4 quirks. It could be 4 elements, 4 physical quirks or 4 behavioral quirks, some habits of the character. You just want to have a set of 7 words or phrases. Now, the way you display it, the way of wherever you show that your character is this way, or you let the character tell it directly, it's up to you. But you only want but you really want to have 7 specific words to define what your character is. So 7 words or phrases. Same thing for your environments. For each environment, you want to be able to have 4 key words or phrases. 2 for the landscapes, 2 for the landmarks, or said another way, 2 for the natural part, 2 for the humanoid-made part. So you want to create this paradox at first, this opposition between landscape and landmarks, or nature and technology. But as you advance in the description and the environment, as your characters and as your public gets more attached to your environment, you want to display the synergies between your landscape and your landmarks. So our recommendation would be to give 1 word or 1 phrase for each to create an opposition, and one phrase or one word for each to create the synergy. So opposition first to create some clarity, and then the synergy. So 1 of each. And finally, when it comes to creating more specificity in your context, you want to consider 3 dimensions of your context. So that's our definition of what a context is. The setting first, so where it is happening. The frame then, so the type of frame you're using, science fiction, western, romance, film noir. And finally, the genre, so action, adventure, comedy, drama, horror, saga, and so on. And you want to give 1 phrase or word for the setting, 2 for the frames, and 2 for the genres. There's a higher degree of complementarity between the genre and the frame than anything else, but you want to consider also the setting through this loop. So that's why you want 2 for the frame and 2 for the genre, because there's a tighter relationship between the frame and the genre. But every time you want to define your setting with at least 1 phrase or word. And that's where you see that the setting and environment are 2 separate things, because the setting here would depend on the perception of your characters much more than the environment. The environment is, because objectivity is relative here, the environment will be perceived by your character more objectively than the setting. Now, if we want to get back to the specificity, you want to display specificity through words and phrases, because words and phrases are your tool when you're writing. If your book contains images, you want to transcribe specificity with images as well. That's another tool. That's just a tool. So you want to use phrases and words specifically in each of these 3 categories, which are characters, environment, and context, by giving each of your characters 7 specific words or phrases. Again, goals, interests, occupation, and behavior. Your environments, 4 specific words and phrases. Landscape and landmarks, first opposition and then synergy. And finally, 5 main words. And for the context you can go for more than 5, but all these numbers are all indicatory, and we recommend that if you're starting, you use these numbers as they are, and then as you're experimenting new story for your second story, your first story, your fourth story, you try to modify these numbers. For the characters part, 7 would be your go-to number, because less than 7 and your character risks to be a little vague for your public, and with more than 7 words it can become a little confusing for you, the writer. For the landscape and the landmarks, don't hesitate to add more. It's all dependent. It's always dependent. For the environment and the context, it's not as tightly defined as for characters. For characters, you want 7 words. More than that, it's too much, and less than that, it's too vague. But for environment and context, it really depends on the amount of time you stay in this environment and you stay in this context. So, as you write your second story, your third, fourth, and so on, you want to experiment with those numbers. Put 4, put 5, put 6, and see how it works for your specificity, because that's really the defining factor of your editing process. Suggest us the content you need. This channel is made for you.